Thank you all for joining us again. I hope you had some good networking and managed to stretch your legs and catch up on emails and messages and everything else. We've got a fabulous panel coming up now. So it's the MTA Deep Dive. I'm extremely grateful for every member of the panel here. It wasn't the easiest thing to convince everyone to fly out and join us in Amsterdam and speak with all their competitors on stage. So before I even do a full introduction, I think this panel is just worthy of a round of applause before we even start. So some truly unique content coming up, and no one better than Maarten Oelering to host and moderate this panel. So Maarten Oelering's from Postmastery. We also have Abel joining us from Halon, who's flown out from the US. And we have Kieran Cooper from Bird now. He's shortened the name. And he's flown out from the UK. We have David Harris from GreenArrow Email, and he's also flown out from the US. And finally, the new player in the game, Mike Hillyer with KumoMTA, and extremely grateful for Mike also to be able to join us. So if we could have another round of applause for these 5 fantastic people. If there was anything you ever wanted to know about MTAs, this is the panel to be asking questions on. So we've allowed a full hour for this, and there should be plenty of time to hear from each of the panelists and also answer all of your questions.
Oh, great, thank you.
So without further ado, I'll hand over to Maarten.
Hello, okay, hi. Maarten Oelering. I've been in email since 2000 and playing with MTAs almost every day. But I'm really grateful for these gentlemen because I was just playing with them, they were building them. And I think there's 3 people from really old veterans that worked on message systems, Momentum. So they know each other, and I'm very happy that they're cozy chatting with each other and not fighting with each other, because they're all competitors now. So we're not going to rumble. We're going to keep it polite, and but we are going to talk about MTAs and about our products. But we already got a little bit of introduction of each of one. But since you all have been in email so long, I'm really curious about a little bit of your history, your personal history. Barry, may I start with you?
Hello. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. Super psyched to see a lot of faces I haven't seen for a while, so it is great to be here. And obviously, thanks to Andrew and company for putting this together. Super cool. Background by me, so I've been in email for, as you can tell, old guy, for about 20 years. I was a founder of Message Systems back in the day, and as pointed out, Mike was one of my initial hires. Kieran was a later hire back in the day, so these guys were all on my team as we built out Momentum, acquired Port 25, and then finally built out SparkPost, and so that was the kind of the trail that I was on. So now at Halon, I think there's been a lot of changes in the market, a lot of evolution, and so joined Halon a little over a year ago, and my focus is helping people through messaging software. And so with that, I'll give it over to Kieran.
Thanks, Barry. Tech was my second career. I started out in marketing for arts organizations and had always been interested in technology. And then in 2005, I accidentally ended up working for an email company, and I've never looked back. As Barry said, I joined Message Systems as it was then in 2014, and I've been with the company through 2 more name changes to SparkPost, and then in 2021 we were acquired by what was then MessageBird and is now Bird. I'm a technical account manager, so I've been looking after enterprise customers initially of our cloud email offering, well, very initially of our on-prem Momentum, and then our cloud email offering. And now my team looks after all of our products, which include cloud email sending, but also SMS and other omni-channel, and our new
combined system called Bird CRM.
David?
My name's David Harris. So I started the... Did this go out? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I started...
I think
There's
it's
a red
working.
light at the bottom. I don't know.
Oh, they're all.
Oh, okay. Well, try. All right. Is this working?
Yeah, it's
All right. Okay. So my name's David Harris. Started GreenArrow email. Was doing consulting for mail transfer agents, and people kept asking, hey, can you make it go faster? So we organically built a product in order to do that. I've been selling it for 20 years. I'm the only non-current message systems or ex-message systems person on this panel right now. So yeah, just love email. It's a great industry. It's a great product.
So I'm Mike Hillyer. So like Barry said, he taught me everything I know. So I started out working for a European open source company called MySQL. Some of you may have heard of it. And from there, got recruited over to Message Systems to start and run their pre-sales organization. I stayed there until 2018, went and did independent consulting at that point for on-prem, mainly because at that point, Spark Posted focused primarily on cloud, and there was still a strong need for professional services and expertise around how to run the on-prem servers. Did that for a while, and then got together with, coincidentally, 2 other ex-Message Systems people to start KumoMTA.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, you already mentioned it on-premise. So what I would like to do is first ask you a couple of questions about on-premise in general. And what do I mean by on-premise? I mean, yeah, owning your own system. It's more like, yeah, getting the software and putting it on your infrastructure versus what some people call cloud, but I prefer to call it SaaS, so software versus SaaS. I would like to ask you a couple of questions on of course, on the products and how do you select an MTA, software selection, and I want to ask some questions about the future. If there's questions from the audience, there will be opportunity later. I will try to keep at least 10 minutes for that. But if you don't understand anything of they say or whatever, raise your hand and we will try to clarify. So let's start with software versus SaaS. Question for you, Kieran. What kind of considerations would you say are important for deciding whether to send yourselves with your own MTA system, if you will, or
Sure.
because your bird has both solutions?
Yes, exactly. I think as you have a cloud version as well as on-prem, yeah. So it's unusual to have for companies to have sort of both offerings, and a lot of my time when I'm looking after cloud customers or talking pre-sales cloud customers, I'm persuading customers who are currently running their own MTAs as to why they should move to the cloud. But I can change my hat in the other direction. I think there are a few key pointers as to why people choose to run their own MTAs rather than outsourcing to a SaaS. Security is probably one of the highest ones because if you run it yourself, you're not outsourcing the customer data that you're sending to anyone else. So, you know, in GDPR terms, you're staying as a data processor rather than using a sub-processor, and for some people that's important. And as is the feeling that the data is somewhere you can touch. Even if it's in a cloud, even if it's in a public cloud, it's still one that you pay for rather than one that you're paying a customer to pay for. And the kind of data sovereignty that goes with that. There's the flexibility, because all of the systems that we're talking about here are almost infinitely customizable. Whereas one of the definitions of SaaS is that the board around the black box is very firm, which has advantages, but you know, if you want to be completely flexible and you want to be able to write complicated rules about how mail is handled, particularly incoming mail as well as outgoing mail, then you might want to be able to do that on your own system and be in control of that. We'll come on to talking about licensing models in more detail, I think, but the pricing is clearly a driver, although, as I say, when I'm arguing as to why people should come to SaaS, I'm encouraging them to include all of the other costs, not just the software cost, in analyzing that. But from a pure software point of view, if you divide the cost of the software by the number of messages, it's going to be a lower cost per message with on-premise than in SaaS. And the other thing is compliance, because if you're sending stuff that, for whatever reason, ESPs have decided they're not going to take on their network, your only choice, if you're going to keep sending that stuff, is to do it with your own MTA. There may be other reasons, but I think those four are the key.
I don't know, David or Mike or Barry, do you have something to add to it? Are there other reasons why you should do on-premise, or maybe why you shouldn't do it? Or because I can imagine sometimes we have people that say, hey, yeah, like on-premise, I want to run my own MTA, it's much cheaper, but yeah, they have to know what they're getting themselves into. So, Mike?
So I'll say why you shouldn't run on-prem. Why not? Because we only have an on-prem option. So that being said, one of the things about us doing it as open source is we have a Discord community. People come in, they start asking questions, and one of the clearest things that often pops up is this concept of saying, I don't think you're ready yet. And that comes from a couple of areas. One of them is sending volume. We've already talked about reputation. If you don't send enough mail, you can't actually build a solid sender reputation in the filtering systems, which means you're always going to be treated at best as neutral reputation. And if we'll have people come, well, we send 100,000 messages a month. And our answer is, if you're not sending that every hour, you're really not in a position to build that reputation and be able to predictably get deliverability. So that's one of the first concerns, is simply, you may not be sending enough mail. Unfortunately, that's the world we're in right now. It would be great if everybody could run their own servers, but too little volume is actually a bigger problem in some cases than sending too much volume. There's always ways to work with too much volume, not to work with too little. It also comes down to essentially that there is a certain amount of skill set required to do this. There's deliverability, operations. You have to be, successful senders in on-prem don't just have a mail ops person anymore. They have to know about deliverability, they have to know about DevOps, they have to know about it's not just stand a server up and run it anymore. We also see people who just don't have the resources to do it on-prem. Which of these cPanel hosts would be best for us to use? And the answer is none of them, because cPanel hosting companies are too easy to get onboarded at, which means they're too easy for spammers to use, and they're very likely to have low IP range reputation. So a lot of it comes down to resources. On the flip side, if you send too much mail, financially it becomes incredibly expensive to keep doing it in SaaS. But if you don't have the right resources, you're not going to succeed if you're sending too little, or if this is not your area of expertise.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so say I'm using a SaaS solution and I want to go on-prem. What does a typical setup look like? What the process, more or less? David, can you tell something about that?
Okay, yeah. So if you're migrating from SaaS to on-prem, well, first you're going to select a vendor and a solution, provision the hardware. You need to be thinking about configuration management, backups, monitoring, who's going to get paged if your server goes down, decide on an IP segmentation strategy. You're going to have to set up SPF, DKIM, DMARC, register for feedback loops, IP-based and domain-based, set up forward DNS and reverse DNS. I think that came up in one of the other panels. I wanted to specifically mention that. So there's a lot of acronyms here. You can get an expert to walk you through all of that if you need, or if you're an ESP, you know how to do all of that. But just for those who aren't ESPs, you should know that. So then you're going to have to integrate ingress, how you're putting the email into the mail transfer agent. and configuring what type of email this is, how you want it to be delivered. Egress, how you're getting the data out of the mail transfer agent. If you're doing bounce processing, feedback loop processing, then you've got email addresses you need to stop sending to. So you've got to get that into your database. Then you've got to warm up the IP addresses. You can't just do a hard cutover on one day. So it's going to be a gradual process, either in your application that's generating the email, have it put some email into your new solution and some to your old solution, or sometimes you can have your MTA, your new MTA, relay into your other service provider that you're migrating from and change the ratios in the MTA. So it's a process.
A lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Barry, did you ever get a prospect come to you and say, hey, I want to run my own MTA, and you had reasons of saying, no, you shouldn't?
I try to not say no to people, man. It's just a terrible thing. But yes, I think that there is, clearly, I think as Mike points out, there's a number of reasons that we would dissuade people from running their own infrastructure, because
You want it to be successful or not?
We do want them to be. I mean,
yeah.
having an unsuccessful customer is just no fun. Somebody who's like going to be like fail at what they're doing is just not right. I think at the end of the day, though, there are situations where it is right, and I think that part of what we look at when we do those evaluations of people who come from the cloud and want to move over into on-prem is asking them a fundamental question. One is it strategic to your business? Is the view of running your own messaging going to make a difference in the success of your business? Most brands would say no, because brands aren't out there for the most part to hire. They have the expertise to hire. If I'm selling dresses at Macy's, I care about what the dress looks like, not how I get my email sent. But for those people who do find it strategic, I think that that is certainly a very promising way to go for them to take control, because of the many reasons that we see in Google and other means to have control of your own destiny. And I think one of the telltale signs for us in terms of does it make sense is, do you have deliverability people? If there's companies that have made a huge investment, and I know the people in this room who do this, it's a tough job. So, and you're very well trained and educated, and so at the end of the day, if a company is going to invest in someone of your qualification, that's a huge commitment of being able to say, I can undertake this myself and run it. So I think we look at that as a huge sign of saying, hey, if I've got these kind of people running it, there's a good chance that that's going to be extremely successful.
Okay. Okay, so then, I want to run my own MTA, and I want to talk about choosing one. So, well, in the beginning there wasn't much choice. So when I started in email, it was mostly postfix, and then at some point there was Momentum and PowerMTA, and that were really the early days. Then, we have 4 vendors here, and it would be fair to say that there's a couple of other ones. I know, for example, MailerQ, I know Email Success, Virt IT, VSTP is one, and Hurricane is another one. So there's lots of choice. But if I were to choose one, and I did. In IT, I saw a lot of people doing software selection, and what they did is walk to a vendor straight away, and then the vendors will tell them lots of stories, and we have got these great features and everything. But I think you should first start thinking by yourself, what are my needs, what do I want myself, and what are important qualities, what I'm looking for. Maybe it's a strange question to ask to the vendor, but I don't know. David, can you maybe what should I as a potential sender know about myself before I start talking to you or the other vendors? What should I know about what I'm looking for, more or less?
Yeah. If you know what criteria you want, you can create a matrix of features or different options, and if they're nice to haves or must haves, and then evaluate the vendors through that matrix. So it's interesting you're asking this question. We just published a blog post on Tuesday. Did it go up? Okay. We just published a blog post on Tuesday with a customer of ours that did exactly that, made a feature matrix and then walked through. So you've got things like how do you want to approach DKIM signing? Support for TLS, virtual MTAs, and IP pool handling, which of course we all have, but then you look at the details of the feature and say, is that a good fit for how we want to approach things? Look at the ingress APIs, how you're going to get data back out of it. Configuration management's a big deal. We all have different ways to go about doing that. And there's a lot of overlap, but there's some differences. Monitoring tools, queue management, the installation packaging, the licensing, async bounce handling, if you want FBL handling or engagement tracking in the MTA, or if you want to do that yourself. Yeah. What is the company, the tech support that they provide? So there's a lot that you can look at and then run a matrix.
Kieran?
Yeah, I was just going to say, also think about both who the other customers are, because do you want to be, are they the similar kind of customers to you? Because that will help you understand whether you're choosing the right system. And also the service that company is going to offer, as you were saying, the kind of technical support and the other aspects around that, either that the company itself offers or that the kind of ecosystem around it offers. From PowerMTA point of view, we don't do training and installation ourselves, but Postmastery have been doing it alongside us for the last 20 years. So, as a combination, that's something you should consider. But I think, as maybe the only non-salesperson on this panel, ask other people to make sure that you are qualifying what the salespeople are telling you. Make sure to talk to other customers, other people in the business. Maybe use a consultant to help you with the process, but also just talk around with other people to make sure that what you're getting from sales, kind of to triangulate what you're getting from sales.
What are you saying about salespeople, Kieran? I'm not quite sure I'm understanding what your point of view here is.
Then David and I are founders who happen to talk to our prospects. We're not salespeople by trade.
There you go. I would say one other thing it's worth considering as well is kind of the architecture of your company in terms of how you would choose to deploy. There's been a lot of evolution lately. So, is your company all about having your own data center, running big bare metal servers? Are you running VMs? Are you more DevOps? Do you want to go into containers and leverage Kubernetes? Do you want to end up doing something where you're going to do hybrid systems? So are you going to run it all in your data center or run it in AWS or Azure and then have split out support for both? So I think it kind of how you build your architecture also would go a long way in looking at the process, because depending on what you want to do, there may be better options in terms of satisfying that.
Yeah, we'll get to that later in a bit more detail. That's an interesting point, the deployment model. I would like to give you all a little bit of more opportunity to talk about your product. However, I don't want to hear all the features, or I want like Postmastery, we have a why. We empower senders to achieve more, and it's quite difficult to think about. Why? I'm more interested in why are you doing this, and how did the product became what it is today. So maybe you can tell a bit, give us a bit insight or in the history of your product, and and actually maybe even why you did it and why it's there.
Shall I start as the representative of the oldest system here? And to a large extent, I wasn't around for the Port 25 origin story, but funnily enough, it's quite similar to the Momentum origin story, which is that the founders were working for a tech company. Someone needed a fast MTA. the existing open source options weren't good enough, so they wrote one and then decided to carry on selling it. The bizarre thing is that the two of the commercial systems that you mentioned, Momentum from what was then called Message Systems and PowerMTA from Port 25, seem both to have been independently started at about the same time, at the turn of the century, and within about 10 miles of each other. I was saying to Barry earlier, it was quite funny when I joined the company Message Systems in 2014, our biggest sales push was to try and put Port 25 out of business. 6 months later, we bought them. And now although Momentum powers SparkPost and Bird's email offering, we don't sell it as we support it, but we don't sell it as an on-prem software these days. We sell Port 25. So it's a long-established system. It's in an awful lot of places. Most of the world's email service providers, most of the world's on-prem senders who aren't using one of the older open source things like Postfix are using PowerMTA. And we continue to support and develop it and support those users.
Very well. Maybe David?
So you guys mentioned that you were 10 miles from each other. Ironically enough, GreenArrow didn't start at this same time, but we're also was 10 miles away. There's something about the water in the Ellicott City or Columbia area of Maryland for mail transfer agents. So the origin story is ultimately we love writing great software, and the delight that you see in a customer's eyes when or that you hear about when a feature that you've built or a piece of software you've built is exactly what they need is just awesome. And we love email. This is such a great communication technology. It's such a great community. So we aim to be the best MTA in the world for email service providers and to have a microphone that works. I don't know, trying to think what are some of the distinctives. Well, I mean, I think we share a lot of these things. We all do performance at massive scale. We've got that proven with, global ESPs sending, gigantic volumes at incredible speeds. So I believe we've also got a mature feature set for senders. We've been steadily improving the MTA, and our focus has been on-prem for over a decade, and we're making it better as we go. One of the things that we prefer to be in our software is very flexible in how we want to, how you can work with us. So, for example, getting data out. We can give you the data in a whole variety of different ways of whatever works. We don't want to lock people into just maybe our way of doing things. And we really emphasize support, that the whole relationship is more than just the software. That you need a team that's going to be there for you. Customers say that we're tenacious in solving problems. We're easy to work with. And then so maybe another thing that's, you asked originally kind of what was distinctive or different. I think we're stable, engineer, founder-led company. We're going to be here for you in the future.
Okay. Mike? Yeah.
So while Andrew said new kid on the block, like has been covered, the three of us that started this, we all met at Message Systems. So we had Wes in 2004, me in 2006, Tom in 2008. We've all been in email since. But we also started out in open source. Wes was one of the original contributors to PHP. I worked for MySQL. And over the last few years, this isn't our first MTA for any of us. It's if you count PowerMTA as well, it's number 4 for me as far as being a vendor or support or an employee of. Wes, it's his 3rd. Tom, it's his 3rd. We looked at it, and one of the main things that we said was, I talked to all these different ESPs over the last few years, and there's been a surprising number of them that have started building their own MTA. And why are you doing that? Well, we don't want to be locked into anything in the future. We've gone down that road. We want the independence. We want the control. And because we all came from open source, it was very clear to us that the answer was an open source MTA. And to bring something into the space that really hasn't been there since, well, that has never been available, because you have people who used to deploy thousands of postfix servers in some cases in order to get the volumes out that they needed. So we wanted to bring that open source option back to the sender space. And as part of that, also get to apply a lot of the lessons that we learned over the years and change how we architect the servers and kind of how it's implemented. So we were able to bring in things like config as code. We were able to separate tenants and IPs completely out from each other, where you don't have to have a virtual MTA of some kind that may or may not represent a customer, or it might be a part of a shared pool. And just being able to bring those kind of changes that we've just seen over the years that were going to be good ideas that historically we would have never been able to get to pass, because it would have been just, you can never tear something down and start over. So there's some cases where there's an advantage to starting new, is you're able to kind of bring in those things that you wish you could have done in the past. And Kumo is Japanese for cloud, so we're very friendly to those who are operating in public cloud.
Barry, can you tell us a bit about Halon and where it came from, where it is now?
I can tell you all about it, but I'll try and keep it concise. So Halon is a Swedish company. It's been founded about 15 years ago, again, so it has some lineage, but it's an interesting one. There's like two fundamentals for the company that we stand by. One, the first one is to be a good eco-citizen in the email space. So the origins of Halon actually, and its original push, was actually for the receiver market, and it's also half of our business today. So basically, Halon is a matter of, like an example, for instance, KPN, which is the official telco of the Netherlands, runs Halon in terms of the way it processes all their inbound mail. So when things go through there, we run it, we scan it for spam, for virus, we look at do DMARC and DKIM checks on it. We look at recipient validations and all the bounces and all the rules that they go in, and the decisions they make about processing inbound mail are run on Halon. And I think as we look at that, we want, as Laura Atkins said, we're trying to protect people. We want good email to go through the systems. We want to protect users from this. But at the same time, as we look at that, we then look at the fact that those same rules that we help generate, those policies, which is how this whole world works, right? The Mulligan, all these guys are policy groups. They're setting up policy for how mail should run. We take those same policies that we learn from all of our receiver customers, and we bake that back into Halon in terms of the way we deliver that to sending customers, so they can start with a foundation that we know is going to work, that's been bulletproofed and tested in some very large receivers in the world. So it's important to us that there's a dovetail between sender and receiver. It's our responsibility to make sure that we protect the people from there, and we also empower our senders to do the right thing by the way that they send. And that's how Halon gives you kind of the flexibility of setting those policies. Mm-hmm. The second aspect of from a foundation of the company is that we are all in on deliverability. And so everything that we build is catered to deliverability people. The focus of what we're doing is one of the key attributes of something called Delivery Insights. It's an incredible real-time dashboard, but provides management so that if there's things you get alerted, you can stop queues, you can bounce messages back, you can delete them. As a matter of fact, one of the things you could do is like DMARC checks. So we talk about all the Yahoo stuff and people who are sending. So before you even essentially allow a mail to go through your system, DMARC check it. If it fails, you can stop it. If it passes, you can make other decisions. You can real-time route it to a different set of IPs that are basically going to allow that to do better. So I think all those things are there to try and empower deliverability people. It's a tough job. It's a demanding job, and you're pulled on by both the business and by serving the ISP community. Having something that's going to help you is pretty important.
Okay, thank you. Mike, you mentioned it, open source. It's you're very passionate about it, and it's a bold choice to go for that model. You told something about it, why you did it, but is there, what's the benefit of what are benefits of using open source besides that it's not free, but.
So
tell us more about that. Why you choose that model?
So there's always two definitions of free. There's free as in freedom, Libre software, and there's free as in no charge. Open source is both, but the focus really is more on the fact that it doesn't add control. And one of the things that why we chose it, first of all, is again, we came from open source backgrounds. We worked for either companies or projects that were. And I started out at MySQL, which is also Swedish. And that was great because I got 5 weeks of paid vacation, even though I lived in Canada. I thought that was wonderful. But we didn't do it for the 5 weeks of paid vacation. We look at open source and say, first of all, pretty much anyone else, every stack that is in here that is sending mail as an ESP is almost entirely open source to begin with. And historically, you look at, for those who've used Momentum in the past, has anybody used it and installed it before? Okay, well, other than Kieran. You'll note when you do so that the installer runs through about 300 RPMs of open source packages as part of it. So a lot of MTAs are built from or built on a lot of open source to begin with. So really the only piece in the whole stack of a lot of sending organizations that is not open source is the MTA code itself, even if a lot of the packages underneath it are also open source. So it felt like really it's kind of an obligation to the community that if you're going to sit on the back of it, why isn't it also open source? It also allows us to develop more of a community. So we have a Discord server that has about 230 people at this point, and a lot of them don't use KumoMTA because we also have deliverability topics, mail ops topics going on in there. But also it means that the MTA becomes better because of the community members. I'm not going to single her out because I don't know that she'd want me to, but there's somebody in the room who's actually already been a contributor to our code just as part of the user, and actually so is Maarten. So there's 2 in the room right now, besides myself, that have contributed to KumoMTA because it's community. It's the ability to grow and improve it based on the contributions of those who use it and who like to just contribute back to something. Mm-hmm. So it becomes stronger in a way because there's more eyes on it, and it gives the transparency that a lot of our users need. We've had enterprise prospects and customers that have come to us and said, well, we've got this big long survey that we give to our software vendors, we need you to fill it out. And we say, well, we are open source, and they go, oh, well, we'll just use our scanning tools on your code and see what we think. So you don't have to take our word for it. You can run the tests yourself and see if there's anything in there. So that's it. It's just better, I think, in this way because it gives something that this community has needed for a long time, mm-hmm. which is a viable open source option for senders.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, sometimes also people want something reassuringly expensive.
That's awesome. I'm willing to take as much money as that.
Yeah.
We had one company where I literally, because they could not understand, the procurement organization was like, we don't understand what's going on. And we're like, we can write you a commercial license if that's what you'd prefer and charge you money for it if you'd rather have that. But yeah, there is definitely that case as well.
Yeah, with regards to licenses, it used to be a lot of server-based. In I don't know, 5 years ago or something, we got this volume-based licensing as well. I think Halon is volume-based, very.
It is.
And for a particular reason, is that what are advantages of volume-based licensing?
I think one is at the simplest level, it's an easy metric that everybody understands. Most service providers out there charge based on a CPM themselves, so they look at that as a volume-based license. I think it allows us to grow with the companies that are successful, so when they basically, as they evolve and continue to grow and profit, Halon can grow and right along with them. I think the other thing that was more important for our customer base was flexibility. And I think so back in the day, we used to sell server licenses back in the Momentum and the Port 25 day, and that was what we did, and everybody was great. But because at that time, there was all about like, well, what server should I run it on? I'm going to beef that bad boy up and make sure it can send a gazillion messages an hour because I only want to buy one server license from you. Uh-huh. And I think that at that point, that was the culture, right? We're rewinding the clock now 20 years ago where that was how things were done. Today's world is very different. You have the notion of basically being able to do more with possibly a set of smaller servers or a distributed set of servers. One of the biggest things we see from our customers is wanting to run in a hybrid mode. So everybody's aware of Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So if you're all of a sudden now doubling your output in just for a weekend, can I stand up servers in AWS, run the messages through there and rent them for 15 minutes, and then bring them all back down, and then not have to have that overhead? And then the final point of that is, if you're running server-based models, you have to plan for a 20% buffer in that, because and always plan for your worst case. Meaning like, hey, if I'm going to send 10 billion messages over a given year, I need 8 servers plus 20% more capacity plus a failover, and then I have to keep all these things running. So you're always planning for worst case. You don't need to do that from a Halon perspective. You basically pull things up when you need them, you tear them down when you don't, you deploy as you see fit. You could do hybrid. So a lot of the ways we quit worrying about how you run your software and more about how your business can be successful by doing a very different distributed computing environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good link to my next few questions, and that's more about the environment and the changes that we're seeing. So especially in the hosting, I also used to carry servers into data centers and put them in. And did that a lot. But nowadays there's this a trend towards cloud VMs, but also containers lately. As an MTA vendor, how do you adapt to that? What does the MTA provide to support those deployment models? Maybe David, you have something on that?
So any of the MTAs you can run in the cloud on virtual machines or in containers. Of course, we support container options. It opens up some great options for high availability. You can create a fully redundant cross-availability zone, no single point of failure cluster. Customer of ours has done that. We just published a blog post on Tuesday where they described their architecture for doing that inside of AWS using GreenArrow. That's Klaviyo. So you can also, so I think what's going to happen over the course in the industry is we're going to have to move up a level of abstraction. Instead of just providing MTA nodes where the customer can build their own fully redundant system, we're going to have to provide, here's just an out-of-the-box fully redundant system, plugs into Kubernetes, and then you manage the cluster itself. Of course, without recreating Terraform or Puppet or different configuration management type things. So it opens up also high volume, and you had mentioned scaling, that you can scale your cluster up or down. And so I think baking that into the software so that the throttling and traffic shaping is all dynamic and centrally managed without creating a single point of failure. And then you can add and remove virtual machines or containers as your traffic. And it's not just scaling on Cyber Monday, Black Friday, it's also just daily. Like you're going to have 1 hour, whereas your highest speed, and you don't need to be paying for virtual machines all day that are mostly sitting idle. So you can even scale during the course of a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that counts for most of the MTAs, that they support those new models. At Postmastery, we and it was talked about this morning, the Yaugul requirements, also alignment. So let's say you're an ESP and you have all these end users with all their domains. We are the whole day busy setting up new sender domains, configuring DKIM, etc. How does the MTA support those developments? So the ever-changing requirements on policy side, and especially for ESPs who need to manage a multi-tenant system. Maybe Mike, can you answer that question?
Sure. So it's interesting in a way because as much as there's been changes that have been introduced by Yahoo and Google, in some ways not everything has changed. Like a lot of ESPs over the years, even if you go back historically to like early Momentum and PowerMTA, a lot of those organizations were already automated to a large degree, but it was done through essentially writing config files into the right location on a disk, putting a DKIM file in the right location on the disk, and then managing that often with like some Perl scripts that read the database, got the information needed, put it onto the disk, and then triggered a reload. All of the solutions you're going to that are up here have continued to work towards modernization. So you look at GreenArrow, there's a full API set that you can use to integrate with. That you can still, like, they can all still be managed on a disk, but you know, you've got APIs to do things like update the DKIM settings and whatnot for servers. PowerMTA now, still a lot of, you know, include files and whatnot, but also support to put your DKIM keys, for example, into Vault. And then you look at Halon, there's a whole HSL programming language. You can talk into a database, you can make your adjustments, so you can write policy that way. Even with us, we've done a Lua engine on top, so we can do config as code. We can say, hey, we had one user that said we have our, you know, right now we have an API that we call, and that API tells us what the DKIM signing should be, and we put that DKIM file on a disk. And we said, well, if you want, you can just call the API directly whenever there's a DKIM signing needed, and we'll just take the answer from the API call and do the DKIM that way. So you're seeing a lot of work towards modernization to, even though ESPs already have solutions for this, to make it easier to scale and automate it. So, and again, that comes down to this whole idea of more elastic scaling, because now we don't want to manage so many disks. Can we put all the DKIM and the other secrets in a HashiCorp vault, store it there? Can we just put the config, you know, managed through Kubernetes and just scale up and down? That's where all of these solutions are heading, is to be able to say, how do we make that automation even easier for users? And in our case, we looked at it and said, how do we balance it? So how do we give something that can be that complicated, but also make it as simple as PowerMTA? So while we built a whole scripting engine, we pre-built policies that say, look, if you just want to do this by editing a file on a disk, drop this script into place, edit this JSON file, and you're back to where you're comfortable. And a lot of organizations like to start with that, and then they just kind of expand as they work their way in. Because when you're replacing an MTA that started out much more straightforward, you're not going to dive feet first into full, deep DevOps integration. You're looking to say, I want to start with a one-to-one with what I have now, and then I'll look at exploring more. And we've had users, like Barry and I used to have this challenge all the time. Momentum had all these amazing things, and people would be like, I don't want to use it. I don't want to get locked in. Right? So now there's getting to be so many advantages that people are happy to start using some of these new capabilities, because it just makes life so much easier than it was in the past.
Yeah. I see a lot of the trend towards APIs, and actually I was promoting HP APIs with PowerMTA many years ago when Fred was there, and told Fred, you have to have HTTP APIs, you have to have a webhook, and in the end they build it. So now I think you all have this kind of features. And Halon is something special where you have this, also this flexibility in
being able to do that. And yeah, so I mean, I think
more scriptability, or yeah.
I think again, a similar, basically like from a deep, like DKIM keys, they're usually stored in a database. Halon comes native with a connector so that we can cache that information and sign. So if you're using something as a normal DKIM signing, that's just going to be, that'll be all in memory and just be basically executed in real time as messages go out. If you're in a cloud base, and maybe you are used, we integrate to almost all the configuration management like Ansible or Puppet. It could be in the container base where that pushes a file to each of the containers, and then Halon will read it from the file based on those keys if you're using more of a container-based methodology. But in any of those cases, I think it's been, like, the focus, right, is to think about the problems not only you're facing today, but where things are going to go, certainly in terms of like the Yahoo Goal Part 2 and Part 3 and Part 4 that are surely coming behind this initial blast, and having facilities to make sure that you can adapt to that without bringing everything down.
Okay. I think it should be time for some questions from the audience, if they are. There's a question. So the question was, how do you manage high availability and disaster recovery? Yeah. And do you want to ask it to someone in special, or?
Not me too.
Okay.
Shall I kick off? Because I think probably all of the systems, because of the stuff we were talking about, containerization and that kind of stuff, But the most difficult part of high availability and DR is IP addresses. And that's not something that an MTA on its own can solve. It's a much bigger part of how you plan your infrastructure. And do you have to keep IP addresses in multiple locations warm, or have you got some fancy way with routers of being able to have IPs in multiple locations? I think that's the challenge that anybody planning an HA environment has got to cope with, and frankly, they can do it with any MTA because it's a difficult bit that's downstream.
So I can describe, so the blog post where I interviewed the MTA team at Klaviyo, and they described their disaster recovery and high availability infrastructure. So it's on our website if you want to read it. But basically, they've got everything split across 4 availability zones. There's an MTA tier. Each MTA handles 1/12 of the total volume. And then there's a reverse proxy tier running HA proxy that has the actual IP addresses. So they split the IPs, to answer your question about that, across 4 availability zones. So a pool won't have all of its IPs on a single zone. I don't know the details of what you would do with dedicated customers and sending IPs. Then they're not using containerization, but they are using basically configuration as code. Terraform stands up the VMs, and all of the stateful information is on an elastic block share. So if the VM dies, Terraform rebuilds the VM, runs the build script, brings it back up. It reattaches to the EBS that has all the stateful information and just picks up with the mail queue where it left off. So we added a feature to make that a little bit easier to do. That's one way you can architect it. We're going to be moving the throttle decision making into the HA proxy tier, adding an option so that connections can be reused across MTA nodes, and then the decision making will be combined on the throttle across all the MTAs without introducing a single point of failure. So that's one way you can go about it. I'm sure there's other ways.
So I'll just answer. So for disaster recovery, so high availability, yeah. Normally what we see right now is use a proxy. We do HA, but we also do SOX 5 because we prefer that SOX 5 gives you back answers as to why connections didn't succeed. HA was meant for inbound, so it just kind of times out. We did a shared, we use Redis for counters so that when multiple nodes are using the same IP, they can maintain traffic shaping rules across the nodes. For disaster recovery, there's still really not a great answer there. One option that has been seen out there is MailerQ. They went with AMQP, so they use RabbitMQ for the queuing layer. I see you shaking your head. The challenge is that it's not performant. So it's kind of a trade-off that I do see some organizations say we're gonna do something like AMQP. The reality is for a lot of ESPs over the years, when they start asking about disaster recovery and you start describing some complicated systems that they could use, their response usually turns into, and I'm not quoting anyone in specific, well, it's just marketing mail, so we'll just take the hit. And there are a couple of organizations that regenerate mail based on failure, so their generator layer, they can. It's pretty easy to get real-time data on what did not successfully send, and all of these solutions, I'm pretty sure, can like take a bad disk and load it in, or take a disk from a bad machine, load it into another, spin it back up again. So there's always that option, but there's really not a good answer for like real-time recovery from another node that doesn't just kill the throughput of the whole environment.
I think that's a result of the containerization. I'd expect that people are going to be looking for an out-of-the-box solution that does all of that from the vendors.
Yeah, and I think proxying it becomes a quite common thing to fix this IP problem. Yeah. There's a question.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't the issue with if you could rapidly shift between IPs or things like that, you know, on different in different spaces, zones, that might make you look like a snowshoer. I mean, I think it's kind of the spam filters by design don't want you to be able to rapidly change your mailing infrastructure.
So typically speaking, these solutions we're talking about aren't about shifting from one IP to another. They're about shifting the IP from hardware to hardware. It's not about using more than one IP rapidly. It's about using one IP among multiple machines and not losing that external IP. Not changing it, but just not losing it in the event of hardware failures.
Yeah. So let me repeat the question. About on-premise versus SaaS. Is the deliverability any different for either solution?
Shall I take that one? I think it comes back to the point about configurability. If you've decided that that you've been told that the connection settings for a certain mailbox provider are, certain number of messages per hour, that kind of stuff. If you're running your own system, you're in complete control of changing those settings. If you're running on someone's SaaS system, you've got to persuade them to make the change, because generally the change applies to everybody. So whether that affects your deliverability or not is another matter. But when you run your own MTA, you have all the knobs you can twiddle. If you're using somebody else's, then you've got to persuade them to do it.
I would just add to that, just from a metaphor, if I could. It's like if you have your kid, would you prefer to drop them off at daycare with 50 other kids, or would you rather have the kid at home getting taken care of by one person who really, really cares about them in an ideal world? Going to SaaS is like dropping your kid off at daycare. You got 50 other kids who are running around, they're all trying to get through the same process, versus one person who's sitting at home with you, making sure everything is good for you. So it's kind of like, will your deliverability be better? If you focus on it, of course it will. There's just no question about it. Taking matters in your own hands and caring about it and loving it will give you a good result. That's part of the reason that people do bring it in-house.
Halon equals Mary Poppins.
I like the Mary Poppins.
So also don't forget, with deliverability, your mailing list quality is just going to be far and away the biggest impact.
There's one more question there. A feature request.
Exactly. I think I'm not a technical expert on it, but I don't think we can do it at the moment. But it's definitely something, given Halon do it, it's definitely something we should be adding.
Right on.
I think we can only have one more question for time reasons, but there's, yeah, you were saying.
I guess there's a question for you. So we're using PowerMTA on-premise solution. It works very well for us. Deliverability is great. Just wanted to know, how committed are they to keeping your on-premise solution as the licensing options for the next 5 to 10 years?
I'm a long way down the pecking order in the company, but I can certainly say that at the moment there seems to be a strong commitment to keeping PowerMTA. We've got lots of great customers that we want to keep, and I know that we're committed to the development and support of it as things stand. But I'm not the person making the decisions on that. But
Yeah, that was a very good last question. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. And I also need to say that, yeah, like Andrew said, it was hard, or I think we failed 2 times. It was a challenge. And I have to thank Willem also, because he's also played a big part in getting this together. So, thank you.
Thank you.